Did you know that buried inside every seed is everything it takes to sprout a whole new plant? If you split open a large seed, like a bean seed, it divides into two pale thick leaves called cotyledons. You'll also see a tiny white sprout at one end, between the cotyledons. The sprout is the future bean plant, and the cotyledons, which are filled with starch, are the stored food that will nourish the plant. Not all seeds look like this. Some, such as corn, have only one cotyledon. Some sprout as soon as they fall from the plant, though most need a rest period, which is usually in the winter. Seeds found in fleshy fruits like apples or tomatoes don't sprout until they're removed. That's because the fruit contains certain substances that prevent them from sprouting. This field might appear to be one of the most peaceful places on Earth. But actually, those plants are hard at work making their own food through a natural process called photosynthesis. Inside each leaf are hundreds of little cells containing many small structures called chloroplasts. Inside the chloroplasts is a green substance called chlorophyll. That's what makes leaves green. Here's how it works. First, the sun hits the leaf and passes through to the chlorophyll. Meanwhile, water is carried up from the roots through the trunk or stem into the leaves and into the chloroplasts. The leaves absorb carbon dioxide from the air and pass it on to the chloroplasts. Sunlight causes the water to separate into oxygen and hydrogen. The oxygen isn't used by the plant and is released into the air. The hydrogen combines with the carbon dioxide to make a kind of sugar. That sugar is the plant's food. Plants can't use all of their food at once, so they use some and store the rest. Plants that store a lot of sugar produce very sweet fruits or sap, like maple sugar. In winter, when the leaves die and photosynthesis can't take place, the plant lives off its stored food until spring. But if plants use their leaves to make food, what are the roots for? Although the leaves are where the food-making process takes place, the roots of a plant are just as important to its survival. The roots absorb water and carry its nutrients to the leaves for the food-making process. So the next time someone tells you that plants get food from their roots, you can tell them they're almost right. The roots bring in some of the ingredients needed to nourish a plant, but the leaves are where the real action takes place. Perhaps you've seen mushrooms pop out of nowhere in your front yard, as if by magic. Well, mushrooms grow from spores, tiny single-cell dust-like particles that shed from mature mushrooms. Each mushroom produces thousands of spores which are carried by the wind. If they land in warm, moist spots that have plenty of food, the spores will grow into mushrooms. The part of the mushroom we see above ground is only the fruit. Underground, a mass of tiny white threads called mycelium grow from the spores and absorb food from the surroundings. At various points, little balls no bigger than pinheads develop. They push upward and break out of the soil into the familiar umbrella shape. Since mushrooms have no chlorophyll, most of them don't need bright sun. In fact, they prefer shady, warm, and wet places. What do mushrooms, mildew, bread mold, and athlete's foot have in common? Well, they're all caused by fungi. Fungi is plural for fungus. There are fungi that produce molds, like bread mold and potato blight. Athlete's foot is also caused by a fungus, but fungi can also be very helpful. For instance, we get the antibiotic penicillin from a fungus, and the yeast that makes bread rise and beverages ferment is also a fungus. But perhaps fungi's greatest job is to rot dead trees and leaves so their minerals and nutrients can blend back into the soil to nourish the growth of new plants. Without fungi, dead trees would just clutter up the forest and the soil wouldn't get nutrients. New trees and plants couldn't grow without the help of the strange little organisms we call fungi. Perhaps you've never heard of Simón Bolívar, but his record of leading revolutions for independence in half a dozen South American countries earned him the name El Libertador, the Liberator. Bolivar was born in Venezuela in 1783, a time when most of South America was under Spanish rule. Though his family was rich, he sympathized with the common people. He was greatly impressed by the freedoms won in the American and French revolutions. In 1811, he and a group of patriots declared Venezuelan independence from Spain, but the uprising was crushed and he fled the country. 8 years later, he led the Colombians to independence. Within 3 more years, he had freed both Venezuela and Ecuador. As president of the union of those countries, called Gran Colombia, he helped liberate Peru. Upper Peru was named Bolivia in his honor. When Gran Colombia fell apart, Bolivar resigned as president. By then, he had many enemies, and he died a disappointed man in 1830. Although he never fulfilled all his dreams, he is considered to be as important to South America as George Washington is to the United States. There are some leaders whose names alone are symbols of an era. Such a man is Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was born in Corsica in 1769. By the time he was 16, he had graduated from the military academy in Paris. When he was just 24, he became a brigadier general in the army and led his men to many victories. Napoleon gained great fame and honor and became first consul or ruler of France. Then, in 1804, he proclaimed himself Emperor of France. During his 10 years as emperor, France was almost always at war. In 1812, Napoleon invaded Russia, but he didn't have enough supplies during the long, cold Russian winter, so his army had to retreat. After losing several more battles, he was finally removed as emperor and was exiled to the Isle of Elba. Napoleon escaped from Elba and returned to fight again. But he lost to the British at the famous Battle of Waterloo, and this time he was sent to the barren island of St. Helena. Napoleon died there in 1821. There were few leaders of the time who could match Napoleon's military ability, and those who could were, for the most part, British. One was Admiral Horatio Nelson, who destroyed the Napoleonic fleet of ships at the naval battle of Trafalgar off Spain on October 21, 1805. This ended Napoleon's power at sea. Nelson himself was killed in that battle, and a memorial statue of him stands today in Trafalgar Square in London. Another Englishman, the Duke of Wellington, defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo on June 18, 1815. After Waterloo, Napoleon was sent into permanent exile. Even today, when someone speaks of meeting his Waterloo, it means that he is in a situation where he is doomed to be defeated. Nearly 100 years after Abraham Lincoln freed the slaves in the United States, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. led a civil rights movement dedicated to equal rights and opportunities for people of every color. In the 1950s, and for most of American history, blacks had little chance for good jobs, education, or housing. There were laws keeping blacks and whites separate and denying blacks the opportunities that white people had. Dr. King believed that this needed to be changed. He led blacks and whites together on many marches and protests. Dr. King's many followers influenced Congress to pass the Civil Rights Act in 1964, assuring blacks and other minorities of the rights promised to everyone in the Constitution. In that same year, Dr. King won the Nobel Prize for Peace. One of the most memorable events of the Civil Rights Movement was the March on Washington. In 1963, Dr. King led an enormous crowd of blacks and whites in a massive march on Washington, D.C. to support civil rights and jobs for all. All of the protesters were nonviolent because Dr. King believed that equality could only be reached through peaceful means. 250,000 marchers gathered at the Lincoln Memorial that afternoon and heard Dr. King deliver the now famous "I Have a Dream" speech. The entire world was deeply shocked when Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated on April 4, 1968. He was only 39, but he had awakened millions of Americans to the realization that a free country means equal opportunities for all citizens. I thought I knew why giraffes had long necks, but I was off la marque. Who am I? Find out inside.
Hey, rattle my cage. I'll show you around poisonally.
When I have a grisly encounter, I just grin and bear it.
Tea time? Do you take one hump or two?
Why is the giraffe's neck so long? Scientists don't really know. French zoologist Jean-Baptiste de Lamarck thought that perhaps the giraffe's neck was once much shorter and grew to reach the upper branches of trees so the animal could eat the leaves there. Modern scientists disagree. Our current theory of evolution, based on the work of Charles Darwin in the late 19th century, says that giraffes which were born with longer necks lasted longer because they could reach the food supply. This helped them survive over time, while their shorter-necked cousins starved and died off. The giraffe's neck has only 7 vertebrae, the same number as you, but each vertebra is very long. That's why the giraffe always has a straight neck. A giraffe's tongue is 1.5 feet long, and its aim is so accurate that it can pick leaves off thorny plants without being pricked. The giraffe is such an unusual animal that even the ancient Greeks and Egyptians marveled at it. They thought it was a mixture of a camel and a leopard, so they called it a camel leopard. The spotted coloring of the giraffe's skin hides it well in the shadows of trees. Its hearing, sight, and smell are very well developed, so the giraffe is very alert to danger. When it's being chased, a giraffe can run up to 28 miles per hour. And if it has to fight, it can give some very hard kicks with its hind legs, or butt its enemy with its head. Even a lion is careful in attacking a giraffe and always approaches it from behind. Did you know that every year deer shed those beautiful branched crowns that we call antlers? They shed them because they don't need them anymore. Usually only the male deer have antlers. They use them as ornaments to attract females during the mating season. Antlers are also used as weapons, and there can be many fights among the males when they're looking for females to mate with. But when the mating season is over, deer no longer need their antlers, so the blood supply to the antlers is cut off and they dry up. The antlers then shed or drop off, and the deer wait for a new growth next spring. In the first year of a male deer's life, 2 knob-like growths called pedicles form on its forehead. In the second year, a straight shaft grows out of the pedicles, and in the third year, branches begin to appear. The pedicles are never lost, even when the antlers are shed. When the antlers are growing, they're covered with a sensitive skin called velvet. This is filled with blood vessels that feed the antlers and build up the bone. After 2 to 4 months, the blood supply is cut off by the formation of a ring around the base of the antlers. This makes the velvet wither and dry up, and the antlers shed. There are many different kinds of deer, from the huge moose to the tiny poodoo. Some have single shaft antlers, and some have as many as 11 branches to each antler. Since this number increases with age, you can tell the age of a deer by counting the branches of its antlers. Though some rhinoceroses can reach the weight of a medium-sized truck, they're usually quiet, slow-moving animals with little interest in fighting. Of course, very few animals would try to tangle with a rhino. There are actually 5 kinds of rhinoceroses living today. The black rhinoceros and the white rhinoceros live in Africa. The white rhinoceros is the largest. It's the one that can weigh over 3.5 tons, and it can reach up to 6.5 feet tall. The other 3 kinds of rhinos live in Asia. Two of them, the Javan and the Indian rhino, have one horn each. The Sumatran rhino has two horns and is the smallest of them all. It usually weighs less than a ton and grows to only about 3.5 feet tall at the shoulder. When attacked, rhinos can charge at up to 30 miles per hour and can do a lot of damage with their horns. The massive rhinoceros eats only grass and other plants, but then again, it might have to mow your whole lawn with its teeth in order to satisfy its appetite. The skin of the rhino is tough and thick, and the rhino's only hair is near its ears and the tip of its tail. Sometimes the horn of the rhinoceros can grow very long. The longest one measured was 62.5 inches. Despite what most people think, the horns aren't made of bone, but of tight clumps of tough hairs. Sadly, many poachers are illegally killing rhinos for sport or to make money. As a result, some rhinos, particularly the Javan rhino, are now in danger of extinction. To conserve such wildlife, many countries have passed laws to protect them and have set aside special wildlife parks for rhinos and other wild animals to live in. If you have any idea how large and ferocious most bears are, you may question the famous legend of how the Western scout, Daniel Boone, supposedly killed a bear by grinning it to death. He was probably smiling because he knew that his trusty shotgun would do the job if his pearly whites didn't. Not many people want to tangle with bears because bears are strong fighters and can be very dangerous. And they can be huge. The largest is the Alaskan brown bear. Some of the males weigh up to 1,500 pounds and may be 9 feet tall when they stand on their hind legs. A good-sized polar bear or grizzly bear can get up to 900 or 1,000 pounds. On the other hand, the Malaysian or sun bear is the smallest of all bears and reaches a weight of only 100 pounds. If you were the size of a bear, 3 meals a day might seem like tiny snacks. A bear has to eat a lot of food. Bears are omnivorous, which means they eat all kinds of food, from honey, insects, and fish to other animals. In the United States, the most common bear is the black bear, which lives in wooded and mountainous areas. Bears have poor eyesight, fair hearing, and an excellent sense of smell. They may look clumsy, but they're actually very fast runners and strong swimmers. Bears are most active at night, but in the cold winter, most of them hibernate or sleep day and night. Bear cubs are usually born in the winter, and most mother bears give birth to twins. Baby bears certainly look cute and cuddly, but when they're grown, they can kill an animal with one swipe of their powerful paws. The camel is often called the ship of the desert because it's perfectly designed to live in the hot, waterless desert just as a ship is designed to be on the sea. The camel's most distinguishing feature is its hump. This is where it stores food for long trips. Before a trip, the camel spends a lot of time eating and drinking. It eats so much that a hump of fat, weighing perhaps up to 100 pounds, rises on its back. That fat is stored food for the camel, who can then go a long time without eating. By the end of a trip, the hump will be soft and floppy because there's no fat left in it. Camels also have little flask-shaped bags that line their stomach walls. This is where they store water for a long trip. Using the water in its stomach, a camel can go for several days without drinking. And that's exactly what it has done for the 3,000 years that we've used camels as beasts of burden. Did you know that there are 2 kinds of camels? You can tell them apart by the number of humps they have. The dromedary is a one-humped camel. They used to live in an area spanning from India to North Africa, but you can no longer find them in the wild. The Bactrian is a 2-humped camel, native to China, Afghanistan, and Mongolia. It's used as a beast of burden in many other areas, too. camels are wonderful pack animals for the desert. Not only can they go for long periods without food or water, but their hair protects them from blowing sand, and they can carry very heavy loads. One word of caution, however. Camels aren't always the most friendly or cooperative of beasts. If they're annoyed, they'll spit at you. You may think that the largest animal that ever existed was some kind of dinosaur, but actually, the largest animal in the world is still with us. It's the blue whale, one of a group of whales called baleen whales. The blue whale can grow up to 100 feet long and can weigh 150 tons. That's taller than a 10-story building and as heavy as a large airplane. Would you like to know some of the other giant animals living today? Click on the colors and find out for yourself. Here's a sea creature you don't want to catch on your line because it'll end up catching you. It's the whale shark, tipping the scale to almost 15 tons and 60 feet long. It's hard to find a scale big enough for an elephant, which lumbers away at up to 12 tons and over 13 feet tall. Indian rhinos are so big that one of them once derailed a train. These rhinos can reach 14 feet long and weigh up to 3.5 tons. It's no surprise that the hippopotamus is one of the largest animals. It can grow to 5 feet tall and eat its way up to 8,600 pounds. The heaviest man in modern medical history, John Bower Minnock, weighed in at 1,400 pounds. How would you like to meet a 30-foot-long, 500-pound anaconda? The African ostrich is a skyscraper as birds go. It towers 8 feet tall and can weigh 300 pounds. You may think that the largest animal that ever existed was some kind of dinosaur, but actually, the largest animal in the world is still with us. It's the blue whale, one of a group of whales called baleen whales. The blue whale can grow up to 100 feet long and can weigh 150 tons. That's taller than a 10-story building and as heavy as a large airplane. Would you like to know some of the other giant animals living today? Click on the colors and find out for yourself. You've probably heard that an ostrich buries its head in the sand when it's in danger, foolishly hoping that if it can't see its attacker can't see it. Actually, ostriches don't really do this, but they do something very similar. When ostriches sense the presence of an enemy, they lie down, laying their necks on the ground and stay perfectly still. They do this hoping the enemy won't find them, but if they're discovered, ostriches get out of there, and fast. They may not be able to fly, but ostriches are the fastest running birds in the world. They can speed along at 50 miles an hour and keep it up for a full 30 minutes. Ostriches do most everything in a big way. Not only are they the fastest birds, but the African ostrich is the largest bird in the world, weighing as much as 300 pounds and standing 8 feet tall. That's as high as the ceilings in most houses. The ostrich also lays the largest egg of any living bird, measuring 5 to 6 inches across and 6 to 7 inches long. You may find this hard to believe, but ages and ages ago, birds looked more like reptiles. Instead of feathers, they had scales. When baby birds first hatch, they're covered with soft down, but soon they grow regular feathers that are suited for flying. Different birds have different types of feathers, depending on their lifestyle and the kind of flying they do. The owl, for instance, has soft, downy feathers that help it fly silently and slowly while searching for and swooping down on its prey. The hawk needs speed to hunt. Its feathers are shorter and lie closer to the body, which cuts down on wind resistance. The duck, a water bird, has special oil glands that coat its feathers. This makes them waterproof and helps the ducks to float. And the kiwi bird of New Zealand has hair-like feathers that are only 2 inches long. It can't fly at all. The upper, more slender part of the feather is called the shaft, and the lower part is the quill. The quill is hollow and has a hole at the tip where nourishment enters while the feathers are growing. The stiff part of the feather is composed of the same substance as a horse's hoof. The bright colors that birds often feature are sometimes caused by pigments within the feathers themselves. The food birds eat may also affect feather color. For example, if you feed cayenne pepper to yellow canaries just after they hatch, their feathers will grow to be deep orange, and flamingos get pinker the more pink shrimp they eat. Have you ever seen a male peacock fan out its splendidly colored tail? The way he struts around, showing off his bright feathers, gave birth to the expression, proud as a peacock. However, the female peacock, called a peahen, is rather plain-looking. It's the male peacock who displays his magnificent feathers in an attempt to attract a peahen during mating season. Lots of male birds do a sort of dance or fluff their feathers to attract female mates, but the peacock definitely puts on the most colorful show. By the way, people often think those beautiful feathers are the peacock's tail, but they really grow out of the lower back. The tail lies behind them and props them up for support. The peacock first came from Asia and the East Indies. There are 2 species of these birds, and they're both related to the pheasant. Peacocks have been known and admired since ancient times. Both the Greeks and Romans believed the peacock was a sacred bird, but that didn't stop the Romans from eating it. Want to win an easy bet? Just ask someone where penguins live. You see, most people think that penguins live at the North Pole, but actually they live at the South Pole, in Antarctica. They also live on the nearby coastlines of Southwest Africa, Southern Australia, South America, and islands near the Antarctic, such as New Zealand. People have always been particularly fond of penguins, maybe because they look like comical little men waddling around in tuxedos. There are 17 species of penguins today. The largest is the emperor penguin, which stands 3.5 feet tall and weighs 80 pounds. But in prehistoric times, penguins were 6 feet tall and they were able to fly. Thousands of years ago, these little men in tuxedos soared through the air just like any other bird. But over the course of ages, their wings changed to short flippers. Why? Well, in remote Antarctica, penguins had few enemies. They could swim or walk about without fear of attack. They didn't really need to fly. What they did need to do was to swim and catch fish. So, after many generations of never flying, the penguin's wings began to change and adapt. Today, the penguin's short, stiff wings are useless for flying, but they make an excellent paddle for the penguin's swimming and diving feats. Penguins have also developed a thick layer of fat, which protects them from the icy waters they swim in.